WCEG Network. We are the worldwide community empowerment group where we here speak life into the community. You can log on to hear us on WCEGTalkRadio.com. You can watch us live on smart TV, Roku, cable channel, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I'm William Bill Edwards, host of Wisdom Wednesdays. For the next hour, I will be pleased to have with my special guest, the first African-American female sheriff in the United States, former Fulton County Sheriff Jackie Barrett Washington. How you doing, Jackie?
I'm doing great, thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. That's just good. Listen, glad to have you. You know, you were supposed to be on the show where it was the Women's History Month.
Mm-hmm. We missed it.
We missed it, and so we're gonna go back a little bit and think we're in Women's History Month.
Okay.
I got you on the phone. Jackie, tell the viewers about yourself, where you come from, and things of that nature.
Well, I mean, and I can do that because I just had to do a quick video for another group. I am originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, so I'm a Tar Heel by birth.
Mm-hmm.
I went to, and in fact, that's really where I started my law enforcement career. It was with the Charlotte Police, is now Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. And then I went to school in Philadelphia, right outside of Philadelphia, in a city called Glenside, Pennsylvania. It was at the time a women's college, so I call it Spelman North. Although we were not, like Spelman is here, we were not next door to a men's college. So we were out there in the wilderness.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience for me. And then I came to Atlanta to go to graduate school at Clark Atlanta. And I stayed, so I stayed here. So I've been here ever since.
Well, how do you take a young lady from Charlotte area and get her interested in law enforcement?
It was a story. It was a long and winding trail, but it always led to the same place. I thought, like I said, I started out with an internship at the Charlotte Police, now Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. And then the next summer, I said, well, that was fun. So the next summer, I worked at the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. And I said, well, that was interesting too. So I talked to the sheriff, and I wanted to work in the jail. He wouldn't let me do that. So I worked communications that summer, which was fine. I still got to work in the office. And then the next summer, I got an internship at the North Carolina State Department of Corrections. So I worked in Raleigh, North Carolina. And by that time, plus I had done internships all throughout my college time with the head of my department, my sociology department. So sometimes you just have to understand what your calling is and heed your calling. Because if you asked me what I wanted to do when I went to college, when I first checked into what was then called Beaver College, it's now Arcadia University, I would have told you I wanted to be a pediatrician. That's what I wanted to do. But that first year chemistry course got me.
That'll get you.
That'll get you. So I said, well, what else do I want to do? And I had this incredible background, really, in working in law enforcement. So I said, let me just continue to do this. So when I went to Clark Atlanta, I continued and got my master's degree in sociology with a concentration in criminology, and then just stayed in the field. So sometimes we have to understand what God's leading is. And even though we may want to go left, he keeps pulling us right. And then you understand that's really where you're supposed to be.
Well, I got to tell my Jackie Barrett story because, you almost got me put in jail.
I did not.
Way back when you were over the training facility, you remember?
Yes.
Over there, what road was that on?
Campbell
Drive.
Campbell Drive.
And I was a new commissioner, and someone told me, said, we got a training facility over there, but it's a shame that people should be training out of that facility. So I went and got with you, and we did a walkthrough and a tour, and it was an elementary school.
It was.
Yeah, it was an elementary school. It had wooden floors. The toilets in the bathroom were still like there were elementary kids there. And I said, this is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
How can we train police officers in that mess? So here's where the interesting part comes in. I put on legislation to have us find a new place to live, and they turned me down. And then they came back. We came back, and I put the same type of legislation on, and they turned me down again.
Well, there you
And
go.
so what I did was, I said, I'm not ashamed to condemn a Fulton County building.
Mhm.
So when the third time came around, that's what I did. So so that forced the county to find a place for you,
Okay.
and they had to allocate $500,000 to do that. All right.
Oops.
But
Hmm.
here's what I almost went to jail for. People were saying at that time, who was the city manager, Dolores? Tom Andrews. They had me and Tom. They had, I don't remember. They had me and Tom Andrews in the paper for taking $500,000 of unauthorized money to get you a place to stay.
Oh, really?
so we got Wolf Creek. You remember that?
Exactly.
We took
Exactly.
them.
After
We
the Olympics, absolutely.
right. We can't let the police sit out there, so we got to do something. So we had some emergency funds, and we didn't have to have a lot of stuff conversation about. We went in there and rehabbed Wolf Creek,
Sure.
and we got you in there.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
I'll never forget. That's my Jackie almost got me in jail. So
Well, there you go. But it was for a good cause. It was
it
for a
was
good
for a
cause.
very good.
And that school, interestingly enough, was owned by the elementary school was owned by the Campbell family that lived on Campbell Drive.
Yeah.
And they left it in their will for the education in perpetuity for the education of white children.
Oh, okay.
So we
I can
said,
see
well, all righty then. Uh,
I can
yeah,
family.
it turned out their grandson, I think, was a member of the Fulton County Fire Department.
Mhm.
And so he said, I'm not going to fight you all's being here, be here. So that's how we ended up being okay in that space. It wasn't a great space, but it was what we could get at the time. And we just made the best that we could make of it. Yeah.
Well, I don't think many people knew it was back there. They knew where you were. At that time, you were like a training director or something like
Yeah,
that.
I was a director of the facility. Yeah. And we did, instead of just doing a police academy, we did a public safety model. So we did police, fire, and EMS all in the same building. So we had, because it made sense to me. I don't know if you remember Operation Big Bird, where we would go
Yeah.
out and act like there had been a plane crash, and
Right.
all the emergency services would come together and respond to our make-believe plane crash. And what I observed was firefighters doing fire stuff and police doing police stuff, but they weren't cooperating with each other,
Hmm.
which didn't make any sense to me. And I think that was a function that they didn't know what nobody knew what the others were doing, and so they couldn't be appreciative of what the others were doing. So once they were training together, they saw each other in the building, they saw each other in the break room, and I think it worked out much better for everybody.
I know you did a great job, and everybody was always asking you to come and talk to groups and
Hmm.
things like that, and you were always around as a training director. But then what happened? You went training director, got one morning and say, "I'm going to be sheriff."
You will. Um, as it turned out, some of the employees from the sheriff's department came to me and said, "We want you to run." I mean, they knew me, and of course, the officers that I trained knew me. So, as you know, as an elected official, when you start to think about I want to run, you got to think about who would vote for me.
Hmm.
Well, I kind of felt like who would vote for me and say good things about me was the public safety community in Fulton County.
Hmm.
Many of them I had trained, I had worked with. But then outside of that, who would would vote for me? So it was literally on the way in a prayer. I had no idea what political life would be like. I had no idea what running for office would be like. So it was definitely a training experience for me. But fortunately, we won. Yay!
Oh, you won. There's no doubt about it. I can't
Mhm.
remember who she ran against. Who was it you ran against? I can't
I,
remember.
you know, in my first race, that first year, I had a runoff in the Democratic primary. I had a runoff in the Democratic primary, and then I had a Republican that I had to face in
Yeah.
November. That happened. That first run, it happened. The second run, I never went through an election without an opponent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Never.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your expectations. Uh, Once you did it and decided to do it, and you were victorious,
Mhm.
what were your expectations, and did you meet them? And just talk a little bit about transition.
Well, I think there's definitely, we talk about it now, the transition from campaign mode to actually governing mode is where you hear it now. Uh, so I had to go from campaign mode to working mode. And there were things about the Fulton County Sheriff's Department that I knew needed to be changed. I remember reading an article in the AJC about, the top 10 law enforcement agencies in the state. And by numbers, the Fulton County Sheriff's Department should have been number 3 or 4. We weren't even mentioned. It's like we didn't exist. We just did not exist. And so one of the things that I knew we had to do was to raise our profile in the metro Atlanta area. And so whenever there was an event, a public safety event, the officers, before I came on board, the officers would work with Atlanta Police Department, but they would work under the supervision of Atlanta police officers. And I said, well, we're going to stop that. So fortunately, I had a great relationship with Beverly Harvard, who was by then the chief of police. And I said, just tell us what area you want us to protect, and we'll do it. So people began to see us out more on the street in a law enforcement mode. And I think that was a huge morale builder and booster for the men and women of the agency. So we did things like that. People actually began to see the Sheriff's Department as an integral part of the law enforcement fabric of our community. Then for me, because I had worked on it before, accreditation became a big issue, saying that we could meet national standards.
I remember.
Yeah, you remember that. So we got started on that. And I think we got it after we got our CALIA accreditation after the Fulton County Police Department got theirs. There were several agencies in Fulton County that had it, but we had just gotten started on it. And it took some additional funding from the commissioners, and we appreciate that so very much. But we, as I am wont to do, we got our law enforcement accreditation, we got our national jail correctional healthcare accreditation, and I said, well, let's go for 3. That would be our correctional accreditation. Now our jail was overcrowded. It was overcrowded. We had huge numbers of people. We had people sleeping on the floor, as they do now, in those kind of bucket things. But that's not a reason why you still can't operate according to standards. Numbers don't stop that. So when they came and assessed us, it took a lot of work. But when they came and assessed us, we got that accreditation also, which gave us the Triple Crown. So we were the first agency in Georgia to get Triple Crown status, to have all 3 of those accreditations at one time.
I bet you not many people know that, do they?
I don't know. The officers were like, I don't know about this. But after we got it, they were so proud of holding and having it that it really became an issue for them that we held that status. Absolutely.
Well, I was there, but talk a little bit about your relationship with the county government in terms of performing the duties and jobs that you have that entitled you to get that Triple Crown.
Well, it has always been a bit of a push and pull, I think, between the constitutional officers and the board. The constitutional officers, the sheriff, the district attorney, the solicitor, and the DA have a job to do. It's outlined in the state constitution. But we get our funding from the board commission.
Right.
And so there's always this, I need this money to do my job. And you all are always like, well, our pot is so big and we have to slice it in a number of ways. And so you give what you can. But that fight has been there historically. I have to say that, I'm sure I came in day one asking for additional funds because we needed.
You did.
Yeah, I'm sure I did. There were things that needed to be done. And yet I think I tried to see cost savings where I could. For example, when I first came in, people, the inmates, the staff, everybody at the jail was smoking. Everybody was smoking inside the building. I said, well, we're going to stop that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wash these walls down. We're going to clean the nicotine off of the walls of the jail. And then we're going to make it a no smoking facility. And that way I don't have to ask the board for money to paint again. Not because we're smoking inside the facility anyway. So while you all gave us those funds, we also became proactive and said, there will be no more smoking inside of this building. It took us 90 days to get to that process. A lot of my colleagues said, you won't stop inmates from smoking in the building. I said, yes, watch us. And we did. So, those kind of things were helpful. But there's always this tension, I think, between some requests to the board are fairly simple, but then there's some things that just cause tension between the sheriff's office, all the constitutional officers, and the board. So, I tell people all the time, you got to be able to count to 4. We got 7 commissioners. You need 4 votes on any issue. You better line up 4 votes.
You used to always say, you need 4. Anything else is just conversation.
It's just conversation. I got the 4 votes. I'm good. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's good. You know, I think you're the only sheriff in my political career that I've ever walked through the jail with.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you know, you and I toured the jail
Mhm.
many years ago, and that's the last time well, the way things going now, they say it ain't changed that much.
Well, unfortunately, I think it has changed a
Yeah.
lot. The building has really suffered from deterioration just because of the constant use. I mean, that building lives 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's deteriorating. Um,
So, Jackie, you've gotten this far. You're now sheriff, and you're taking care of things. But people look at you and say, "She's a woman." How did that affect you?
um, it did. I mean, first of all, the staff had to get used to it. They were not used to working with a female in charge, so there was that little push and pull. And then, in the general community, um, people had to get used to seeing a woman in that position.
Mhm.
So, I'm glad that we broke that barrier. I remember doing an interview during the campaign, and one radio station host said, "Why do you want to take a man's job?"
Mm.
And I thought, well, where is it written that this has to be a man's job? And
Mhm.
so I think after that interview, I started saying, let me ask you to do something. Just pull up a picture in your mind of a Southern sheriff. What does a Southern sheriff look like?
Mhm.
Hmm. And let's throw that out. And now let's talk about competency. Let's talk about experience. Let's talk about expertise to get the job done. And let me be that picture. Because if all you're looking for is that guy from Dukes of Hazzard, I mean, we can get you one of those, right? But I promise you, I can do better. We can do better than that. So it was a matter of changing the mindset and having our community start to look at credentials and not just, you know. In fact, one of my opponents, who's passed on now, said, we need to elect somebody that looks like a sheriff." I mean, what does a sheriff look like? So we really had to change the mindset in this community. And that had happened in the deep South is incredible. I'm so proud of my hometown, my adopted hometown.
Yeah. It really is. It really has. A lot of things. There was a lot of perceptions out there as sheriff, and knowing you to be the first African American sheriff in the country. Uh, that's a big one to swallow. I mean, I can tell people I was there, and she did a damn good job.
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much.
But
I
but
belong to an organization now called the National Black Sheriffs Association. It's brand new and just really getting off the ground. And matter of fact, I called today to say how many black females are out there that we can count now. He said there are 13 black women out there now,
mm,
which is wonderful, and mostly on the East Coast. So I'm excited about that.
mhm. The one thing I know that you probably had to deal with during that time as sheriff, and it's an education process for uh, constituents.
Mhm.
That is, uh, what can the sheriff do? What can the marshal do? What does the
Mhm.
PD supposed to do?
Mhm.
We got these things. I had one person told me when I was commissioner. They said they were mad because the marshal pulled them over and gave them a ticket. They thought that they went on around. You can't give me a ticket. You're the
Mhm.
marshal.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
little bit. How did all that? What did y'all do to kind of correct all that kind of thinking?
Well, it took a lot because that was the impression. I did a lot of speaking in the community, and that was the first thing that I had to do. I mean, and again, I'll go back and use Chief Harvard and explain what does Chief Harvard do and what do I do. So that we have a distinction. Understanding that the sheriff has every right and responsibility of any law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia. So can we give track of tickets? Of course. But that was not our primary responsibility. Our primary responsibility, like Atlanta, or Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, Clayton, Chatham, the bigger counties, really focus on the jail, the courthouse, warrant services. So that's what we focused on. Anything else was gravy on top, really. If we needed us, we could do that. But the Atlanta Police Department was the agency responsible for policing the city of Atlanta. Now, understand that Atlanta's jurisdiction is just the city of Atlanta. So outside the city limits, they had no jurisdiction. We had statewide jurisdiction. So sheriffs can go pretty much anywhere in the state on a warrant. So we did things like extradition of prisoners. We certainly operated the jail. We secured the courthouse, um, served warrants. Those were our primary functions.
And to assist other law enforcement groups
Yeah.
need you.
Yeah, if they needed us, we had a wonderful relationship with state and federal agencies in this county. So that, for example, during the Olympics, we all worked wonderfully well together. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned jurisdiction. I was going to talk to you about that, and this kind of like carte blanche jurisdiction that the sheriff has under a warrant. I also understand that a sheriff can go into when asked, go into a police department and certify certain officers to give that same kind of jurisdictional power. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can. We did that a lot. There were a lot of multi-jurisdictional task forces out there. During my tenure, we had one that focused primarily on fugitives. So I had officers and I swore the other team members in to my agency so that all of us could collectively go and look for people who were fugitives. You'll see it with drug task forces. So yeah, the sheriff's office will do that quite a bit to give other people the same jurisdictional authority that the sheriff has, so they can operate outside the city of Hateville or outside the city of College Park. Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes sense. Mm-hmm. People running for the city line.
Exactly.
And getting away that I heard that some time ago when I was commissioned that you had the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit. I know when you came in years ago, how was staffing? And then to add to that, was the fact that you were a woman, did they have anything to do with your increasing staffing or decreasing staffing? I'm not talking about staffing, I'm talking about potential people coming in.
You know, it's an interesting question. If it affected, I know of 2 people who resigned and quite frankly, they said because they couldn't work for a woman. Fine. But I only know of 2. I think for the others, once they saw us up and operating, they were okay with me as the agency lead. So that didn't, my being a woman in this job did not affect them. I think it was such a point of curiosity that a lot of officers came and joined us just so they could say, yeah, I work for Sheriff Jackie Barrett, So I only had 2 who just said flat out, can't do it. Our staffing certainly increased. You will recall that when I came in, I'm sure that you were commissioner then, that we had a work camp, we had a corrections camp, and the decision was made to close that down. Mm-hmm. So those officers came over to us. So we got a bump in staffing just by absorbing those correctional officers, absolutely, which were a godsend for us. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that we got a bump in staffing was because the county closed down that old work camp. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know you have a lot to deal with as a sheriff. I know you've had and you've done it well. One thing you had to deal with was the judges. Yeah, I'll bring it up. Yeah, the judges having a relationship. When I'm talking about bad or good, just having a relationship with the judges that allows, because if we're not getting people processed through, exactly. I can always remember hearing the sirens going down the street with the van or the bus, and everybody's trying to move out the way. Here comes the bus, and but then I learned that a lot of those people who came on that bus was not seen that day.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, how did you handle your relationship with the judges and the judicial aspect of things?
Well, it is always you handle judges very gently. But what we did was we started keeping records, the data. A lot of times the judges would, in fact, because it was customary, they would send for inmates to come over so that the attorneys who were going to be in court that day could have visits with their clients. Had nothing to do with their cases being heard, but they would be on Judge Smith's docket. So we would bring them over, and they may see their attorney and they may not. So we finally started keeping a record. Judge Smith sent for 12 inmates. She saw 3. Mm-hmm. And once we started publishing that data, they began to see that they couldn't do that, because every time you move inmates, it was a security risk for us. And so that's how we really had to begin to stop that practice. It was just too dangerous to keep moving people for no, because the attorneys could always go to the jail to see their clients. That was not an issue. I mean, the jail is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that's not a problem. It was a convenience for the attorneys that we brought them to the courthouse. But we finally said, no, we can't do that. So we stopped it. We stopped it, but we stopped it with the understanding that everybody was now looking. So you can't just, one of the things you find out is you can't just tell judges, we're not going to do this anymore. You let them see what the data is showing, and you're not afraid to publish the data. And we weren't. So then they could get that on their own.
Well, that's good, because I always thought about that. You take a person to jail, I guess their parents know they're coming, and the family get there, and they're sitting in old bleachers, and
Sure.
never see that person. That's a taxing deal.
Mm-hmm.
How important in that position is community outreach, and kind of when should it be done? What way should it be done?
Community outreach is extremely important, and it should be done as often as the sheriff can manage to have that happen. We did a couple of things. We had a program called GREAT, Gang Resistance Education and Training, that we did in Fulton County schools. Yeah. We did it in middle schools, and so we had another program that we used for elementary school, and we had another program that we did for senior high schools that had to do with driver training, driver safety. And I wanted to touch them middle school, elementary school, high school. So they saw us in some programmatic way throughout their education here. So that to me was important. How do I know that it was working? In my neighborhood, I saw a couple of kids with great t-shirts on. I was like, yes, they wore their great t-shirts. So that was important for me.
Great was a big thing. That was a big program.
It was. It was.
Really?
Yeah. And we did it in Fulton County because Atlanta city schools had there, and they wouldn't let us do GREAT. So Fulton County said, well, yeah, come and do that with us. And so we were able to do the GREAT program in Fulton County schools. With our seniors, that's another vulnerable population. We visited with them as often as we could. Seniors love to have something to snack on, or just want to be remembered. And so we established relationships with a couple of companies that would give us surplus goods. And so if I could just take them some juice and some crackers, they were fine.
Absolutely.
We did that once a month. We'd make our rounds to the senior high rises. At that time, the senior high rises. And so we tried to touch them as often as we could. And the whole point of this is it's all about community policing. It's how we did community policing, so that if people needed us, they'd be comfortable calling us. If we needed them, they'd be comfortable talking to us about what was going on in their communities. So just the fact that we touched them as often as we did, I think, made a big difference in their ability to be comfortable coming to us when there were problems in the community.
Let me drop back to recruiting a little bit for you. What were your best methods of recruiting? And then were you recruiting, so to speak, to get more women into the police system, or were you recruiting? Of course, you want the best you can. What was the best instrument that you used in recruiting?
I'd say people coming out of the military.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you come, sit around. I mean, literally go to the Fort McPhersons of the world when people were out processing, and if you could have a table or whatever, but that was getting people who were former military was absolutely wonderful for us. We also obviously talked at career day at colleges and universities around the metro area. The sheriff's department at my time was probably 30% female.
Yeah.
It probably is a little bit higher than that now,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the dynamics of the population. But I never had. I think there were some women who were there when I was there, who were the first women who were employed by Sheriff Stinchcombe, because
Mm-hmm.
you had a female population at the jail. So
Mm-hmm.
somebody, you would want female officers there to guard that population. So there was some necessity to it. But then women just started coming on board, and
Mm-hmm.
it became a place where women could make a difference. There was nothing different about the job that they did. There was nothing different about the assignments that they had because of their sex and because of their gender. Okay, you do the job.
Well, we have a question from a constituent here. We'd also read to you.
Will you ever enter the political arena again?
No.
You got to say it so fast.
No.
Yeah.
that there's a time and a place for everybody and everything.
Yeah.
And I had my time. And I think, like I said before, the people with whom I dealt, and looking at the inmate population today, I would be scared, to be honest with you, about running around the jail like I used to do. It's a different population, and sometimes I think
Explain that to us, Jackie. Explain that.
well, I mean, staff at the jail are not armed, right? So they're in there with just their wits about them. They may have some OC gas or something like that, but they're not armed. So you're in there now with people who've made, you've heard the term shanks. They've taken out parts of the building and they've made knives with it.
Mm-hmm.
The mental health issues are rampant inside that building now.
Mm-hmm.
And so whereas I would go in the building, with maybe one or two of my staff people and be very comfortable, I don't know that I'd be that comfortable now. I always thought it was a matter of showing respect to people and they would show respect to you. But mental health being what it is right now, not so great. And the jail being the de facto mental health place where people are locked up. I would have a different feeling about going into that building now. I really
Mm-hmm.
would. So, like I said, I think there's a time and a place for everybody and everything. I think that some things belong to a different generation, and I'm glad that I had the time that I had. I'm not interested in going back into it.
Well, whoever you are, she said no real fast. You really said no. One of the things that was a factor in your tenure there and a lot of other tenures has been the ability to house inmates from other jurisdictions, whether it be federal, state, and things of that nature. Take me to when you were there, how much of an effect it had on you, and how do you see it today?
Well, when I was there, the sheriff's department, the jail, had become a bit of a dumping ground. We had other agencies, particularly the state, who would arrest people on technical violations. I don't mean to get too technical in my answer, but somebody would miss curfew or miss a drug test, and they were on probation. And so the probation officer from the state would just lock them up at the Fulton County jail. And the whole point of that was to get their attention. Now, either you're going to put them back in prison or you're not. We were not the place, and we didn't have the space to house 200 state inmates just because you wanted to get their attention. So again, I had to go to Governor Barnes at the time and say, I can't do this. I don't have the space for it. And they would pay us $35 a day. Now it cost us $75 a day. So
that's the important part.
Yeah, you do the math. I said, no, we can't. You keep your $35 a day. I can't. We can't do this. So that was our issue of housing people that really didn't belong to us. And I came back to you, as a matter of fact, and we talked about building a detention facility for probation violators in Fulton County, because Fulton County doesn't have one. Every jurisdiction in the state has one, but Fulton County. That we weren't successful in getting that done. Housing with other jurisdictions, yeah, we did that a lot. If somebody had some free space, we would send 15, 20 inmates to that location. I think Union City comes to mind.
Yeah.
When they built their new jail, we housed some people there. So
Yeah.
wherever we could find space, we did.
Well, yeah, I remember the Union City jail. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna say what you said about it, but
I probably still say the same thing about it, but it is what it is. Yeah.
It was really nice. It was nice.
Yeah.
So all these factors, how much, go back to my original question about the inmates from other places, how much do you think that has changed over the years? I mean, are they still coming at the same rate or?
No, because Fulton County just does not have the space to house inmates from other jurisdictions. And so while some agencies may do that, maybe in South Georgia, North Georgia, Fulton County, the metro area, just does not have the space to take inmates from other jurisdictions. So I think, it's all that we can do. Our building is that the jail out there is built for about 2,500 inmates. Today, they may have 2,700 or so in that main Rice Street building. And then they've got others at Union City and other places. I know there's some in Cobb. So Fulton is busy trying to get people housed in other places. And that's an ongoing battle, that's for sure. Labat.
I remember when, as a commissioner, a citizen come to me who had a person that was incarcerated in your jail that was outsourced. Okay. And the issue was, it was a close relative, like a mother or something like that. And the issue was, it was unfair to them because they could not see their loved one
Mhm.
They'd have to go away to do it. And you know what I wanted to say was, well, don't commit the crime, but I couldn't say that. But does it really keep? I mean, is that a factor really? I mean, how many people really keep contact in jails or come by visit people as opposed to them being outsourced somewhere?
It is an issue, and it was something that I try to keep, in the forefront of my mind, because one of the things that helps keep your population calm, if you will, is to have visits from family. And so I wasn't intentionally trying to take that away from them. But when your loved one is all of a sudden now in Union City, I'm not picking on Union City, I'm just saying, if they're now in Union City, as opposed to taking a bus down, to Wright Street, now you got to take a bus to Union City. So I realized that there was inconvenience there. So we tried to take all of that into account. And maybe those who were already tried and just in transit would go there. But that's important, and we did take that into consideration. Sorry, we couldn't accommodate everybody, but I would think that families would want to know that their loved ones were in a place where they were safe, where they could be in a cell that was made for two, not three, and they were going to be looked after well, as opposed to in an overcrowded facility where they could be hurt, harmed, as they would have been in Fulton County.
Well, to be in Union City was being nice to them because I mean, there's this other side of town, north side, and other counties and stuff like
Yeah.
that, which creates a double burden.
Yeah, we had some in Roswell. That was a real burden. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I guess they had the space for you.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that negotiation go? Do you just call up and say, hey, how many beds you got?
Literally.
Is that right?
How many beds do you have, and what are you charging by the day for them? And then you either come to the board and ask for the money, or find some other way of paying that daily amount. And so, that's literally the way it goes.
Well, when you outsource, does it usually exceed what you usually would pay? I mean, let's say in your time is $75 a day. Would it usually exceed? Because when the state brings their employees in, it doesn't. You don't pay half the amount of money, and that's another question. Why did they pay so much less?
Because that's the way it always had been done. Nobody had challenged it. I think until I got there and said, I can't. I just cannot do this. It's a great deal for you to pay us $35 a day, but it does nothing for us. So no, it's no more difficult than that. You call Sheriff Jones and say, how many beds do you have? And he said, I can give you 25 and negotiate a price. If there was something that needed to go through the board, then it went through their board, our board, and we had the money, then we could do that. But so because I mean it is a contract, and so you understand who has the ability to enter into contracts, right? So we had to go through those kind of gyrations, but that's okay. If we could find the space, we wanted to do that, because when you have, I need to tell my staff, when you just like at your house, if you got a house and you got 4 people in it, mom, dad, and 2 kids, now all of a sudden you got 12 people in the house. There's always somebody in the bathroom. There's always somebody in your space. It just gets crowded. And then you start talking about disease, and it just is a mess. So it was much better for us to spread people out so that we could avoid those kind of things than just have them all lumped up for the sake of being on Wright Street.
Jackie, I know you talked about going to the schools and stuff, but what is the minimum age it took to either be a sheriff, and what was the minimum requirement?
21 is the minimum age, and the minimum requirements are pretty much the state requirements. It was at that time high school degree, or GED, or high school degree, or its equivalency. What Sheriff Levide is doing now is I think he's paying more for people who have college degrees. So AA degree gets you a little bit higher on the scale, BA gets you a little bit higher on the scale, which is a wonderful thing that he's been able to accomplish. They passed a physical, they passed what I introduced was drug screening and psychological evaluations. So those 2 pieces were introduced into my administration, and they did. Everybody had to go through a background check. So those were the basic qualifications to come on board. So getting past all of that pretty much got you in the door. Then you had to take a post required that you take a reading comprehension exam. Post being the agency that licenses law enforcement officers. They had them to take a reading comprehension exam to make sure they would be okay at the academy. And then, of course, they had to go successfully complete the academy. So those were the requirements. Everybody who went to the academy graduated. At that time, it was really pretty much 6 weeks. It's longer now, but it was about 6 weeks, which is not nearly enough. And then they were assigned to a field training officer or to an officer inside of the jail who could continue to work with them, with the new people, to really kind of get them beyond the basics. So getting past all of that took about a half a year, took about 6 months for us to have an officer that we were comfortable putting out on their own.
Now, here's an interesting one fact, Zach, I want you to get to talk to people about. We just talked about what it would take for the aid and stuff of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about once you get them all through that, and they're really going, what have you spent for that one individual?
Yeah. I don't know that number, but I would certainly tell you it is an investment. And so Sheriff Labatt is doing a sign-on bonus, for example, but he's requiring people to stay for a year to get the bonus. Yeah.
Yes.
Because you've put a lot of time, effort, energy into a person at that point. And I can't give you the dollar figure what it was for us then or what it is today. But you spent a lot of money on that person to get them ready to go. And just to have them leave is just cost prohibitive. And one of the things that's happening now, not just across the metro Atlanta area, but across a lot of agencies, is that Atlanta will pay, let me just using round numbers, Atlanta would pay $50,000. Well, the cab will pay 55. So they will leave and go to the cab.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have now is just this cycle of people just going from one agency to another just to get that signing bonus. Can't blame them, because it's more money, but it is an incredible drain on the resources of any given jurisdiction when people leave you like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you got to do it, I think Sheriff Labatt is doing it right. Mm-hmm. If you sign a contract for a year or two, because it is an investment, man.
It is an investment, absolutely.
It's like money thrown out there on both in the industry for nothing. So that's always important. Mm-hmm. So families, you come in, you got a active sheriff office, active employees, and I always tell people, if you ever want to make me mad, just talk about police and fire. Mm-hmm. Because those are two departments that I believe in. How was your relationship beyond the police force or the sheriff's organization? But there's a family out here who owns those people. All right. How do you, in terms of morale and things of that nature, how do you kind of commingle their families into what they're doing, or is that something that needs to be necessary?
I go back. I realize that the families literally are literally loaning us their loved ones. They spend sometimes more time with us on the job than they spend at home with their husband, wife, spouse, partner, children.
Right.
And so we try to incorporate them as often as we could. For example, during basic academy, when I was academy director, I had one night during that 6 weeks where it was family night. We invited the families to come, and we had evening training, and we allowed them, the families, just to come in and talk to us as trainers. What were they going through? What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? And I remember promising them that while I could not make any guarantees about anybody's personal safety, that we were going to do our very best to turn out an officer who was well trained and well prepared to hit the streets and be safe as best we could do it. And that was my promise to them. So there was that first involvement with the families. And then we did things during the year. We either did a picnic in the summer that was a family event so that the officers and their families could come. Or we did a Christmas holiday party where people could get all dressed up and I could see the officers in something other than that brown uniform. Of course, it's gray now. But and they could bring their loved ones with them. And that was always a fun event that allowed us to see the other side of them, to see their family lives. So I think those kinds of things were very important.
Because one thing I've learned in politics is that when an officer dies on duty, there's nothing like what you would see at the homegoing ceremony. I mean, we just lost Officer Garcia, and so it shows that that's a family, that's a fraternity. You know, they're working to each other. The other thing I witnessed as an elected official, when the call comes in, officer down.
Yes.
And I got caught up one day and I saw all kind of police cars coming from everybody, Union City, Fairfield, everybody. You know, they're just streaming down the road. And then I found out there was an officer there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of, and how do you all keep that morale to that point? Because it is a family, it is a fraternity, whether you're wearing blue and white, or
Exactly.
whether you're wearing gray and black or whatever.
Yeah, it is. And I think the officers take that belonging to that fraternity, to that family, they all take it very, very seriously. And so to this day, if you hear officer down, they're going to come from everywhere to help. That is still standard policy. So, you know, I had several officers who were injured during my time. I had one who was killed in the line of duty. And that's a sobering kind of scenario when you have Officer Kitchens. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, everybody's at the hospital, everybody's standing watch, standing vigil, and hoping for the best. Because we know that, you know, I used to always wonder, what is it worth to the county? What's my life worth to you? $30,000, $40,000? Why are we bickering over starting pay? Because at the end of the day, I could conceivably give you my life in the line of duty
That's correct.
for $35,000 salary. You know, I think we need to give them as much as we possibly can every day of the week, because you know it's a calling. It absolutely is a calling. I had to do a study many years ago when I was working for the state, and we were looking at stressors for police officers, and from Annapolis to Atlanta to Albany, the officers said our number one stressor is our salary. The one thing that bothers us the most is how little we make it. It didn't matter whether they were in Albany or Atlanta; it was never enough. Is my point, and it's not enough. You know, so that's why you're seeing right now officers' salaries are going up, because we as a community, we're finally beginning to realize that we've got to pay teachers. We've got to pay law enforcement personnel all that we can pay them to get them, to attract them, and to keep them. So recruitment and retention become very, very important.
But I tell you, he says that money is always important. I remember a survey being done in the county about police officers and their needs. And you know what the number two thing was?
What?
Color of the uniform. I said the same thing, really?
Really?
It was
Well, it's a
colored.
point of pride. And Sheriff Labat has done a wonderful job of moving from the statewide accepted Sheriff's Brown into a really nice, handsome shade of gray and black. And it looks nice.
Yeah,
But
Sheriff has done well.
Mhm.
He's done some things. I'm sure that what he has to deal with is magnified 3 times
Yes.
what you had to deal with.
It
And
is.
so I can sympathize with anybody who has to do that job. It is not one that people are gonna send you flowers for every day. But well, okay, I tell you this. I have known you now for about
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. Okay. You want to put it there. But I tell you, I want to say this to you from my own experience, from meeting you for the first time and working with you on the old school over there on Camel Drive, and seeing you speak at a lot of functions like the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, even Old National Merchants Association. I don't think you turn many people down to come in and talk to. And you've been great. You have been great. You always will be great. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to work with you as Fulton County Commissioner for a while. You know, I give y'all money, man. Y'all come back in. Sometimes I didn't, now. But most of the time, I did understand. So I really appreciate you, and you know, I know you're still actively involved in the community, and people are still calling on you to do different things. I know this because Gene tells me.
Yes.
Your husband Gene tells me, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I enjoy that part of my life at this point. I am finally quasi-officially retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, because after I retired from law enforcement, I went to Spelman College, which was full circle for me, back in the classroom. So I just retired from that after 15 years.
You were 15 years?
Yes.
I remember you were there. They were telling me you were there, but it seems I don't seem like you were there for 15 years.
15 years, absolutely.
Oh my gracious!
So I just turned in my chalk in December, absolutely.
Oh my goodness! Well, you have come full circle in doing all of that. Before we leave, just briefly, just tell me, what would you like to see in the future for sheriffs or any law enforcement agency as we go forward?
I think what I would like, there are a couple of things I think just because of the tenor and tone of the time. I'd like to see sheriffs left out of national conversations,
Okay.
being pulled into political discourse.
Right.
And I hope you understand what I mean by that. Is that we got a president now who's threatening sheriffs that if they don't participate in his immigration program, that there will be repercussions. That's not what they were elected to do. If they choose to do it, so be it. But I don't think that they should be forced into it. And
Right.
yet I think politicians at the national level understand the importance of the sheriff's office. And that's why that pull is there. So I really wish that there were more independence in that area. I think that there definitely needs to be more, I can't wait to go back to money, but more training, more technology put towards literally the technology that's out there that helps officers do their jobs. I remember one night going out with my officers, with my fugitive team, and they were going into vacant houses looking for people. I thought, this is dumb because you don't know who's in there, you don't know where they are. And so when I was able to do it, I bought some heat-seeking technology so they could see if there was heat inside of that building. But that's not available to everybody, and it should be.
Right.
So the technology that's out there, I think we ought to, as a community, as a country, we need to do a better job of equipping our officers the best we can to make sure that they can do their jobs as safely as they can. So those are the two things that I'm particularly concerned about right now, leaving them out of somebody else's political conversation, allowing them to work more at the local level and giving them all the tools that they need to get their jobs done.
Well, before we leave, we got one more question for you.
Yeah, this is a two-part question. Number one, what's in your future? And number two, are you really retired?
I tell people all the time, my department chair at Spelman, because I kept threatening to leave, she said, are you really going this time? I said, yes, I'm going. She said, okay, we're going to give, this was on Tuesday. She said, okay, we're going to give you a reception Thursday to make sure you get out. So I'm really, really retired, I think, at this point. But we have wonderful grandchildren, and I don't want my being at work to be an excuse for not being able to participate in, soccer games and all the things that grandkids and grandparents get to do together, because I'll look up and they'll be gone. And so they are what's taking up my attention right now is the grandkids. So that's, and I'm fine with that. I am not just fine with it, I'm over the moon with that. I am delighted to have this time back now to spend with my family.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I got one word to say about you, and that's legendary.
Thank you so very much for having me.
And you'll always be. I'm glad we could get you on. We missed you for the this month, but we really wanted to acknowledge you during that time. Okay, so thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to subscribe to us here at WCEG, you can like us on Facebook, on Instagram, connect with us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Thread. You can also download free WCEG mobile app. Alexa, play WCEG radio, and listen to WCEG on any of our platforms and broadcasts. Before I leave, I got to say this. The topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and their guests, and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support, and like always, in all you're getting, please get an understanding.